We start with the word here of introduction concerning talking about the preface. In the preface, Lewis elaborates on what we all should know. You cannot have both heaven and hell at the same time. It's either one or the other. It's kind of obvious, but often we live our lives contrary to that belief when we cling to worldly vices and values that may have no place in Christian life, much less heaven. Now, Lewis says in the preface, evil can be undone, but it cannot develop into good. The fact is, we must wholly reject evil for heaven to be fully embraced. And here's one of his famous quotes. If we insist on keeping hell or even earth, we shall not see heaven. If we accept heaven, we shall not be able to retain even the smallest and most intimate souvenirs of hell. Now, a lot of this he wrote in response to his, now remember that C.S. Lewis is a literary mind. He was a deep, deep thinker in literature. And William Blake wrote The Marriage of Heaven and Hell between 1790 and 1793. In the book, he tells us that good and evil aren't really what we think they are. They're just different kinds of energies, and both are needed to keep the world going. The Bible and other religious texts, Blake said, have been responsible for a lot of the misinformation we've been given. He claims that two types of people exist: the energetic creators, or devils from hell, and the rational organizers, or angels from heaven, of which he claims both are necessary to life. You remember, the good angel and the bad angel sitting on your shoulders? Both are necessary for life. So let's start here. Why do you think humanity is constantly searching for opportunities to blur the lines between good and evil? Why is that dangerous? Let's think about that.
Because we're not always good.
We're not always good.
It comes down to greed. If you want more for yourself, sometimes you neglect others. But some people think it's good to have more for yourself. So that's the differences.
Our society says that.
Do what?
Our society says that to have more for yourself is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I myself go for power. So we blur those lines.
I think
Go ahead.
whether this is the reason or whether this is the result of the reason, I don't know. But we tend to judge ourselves by our motivation. And we judge everybody else by what they actually do.
That's a
So
good thing.
if we judge another person by what they actually do, and we see that is evil or wrong, but then when we do the same thing, we say, well, we didn't really intend to do that. So by doing that, I think we're trying to blur the lines a little bit subconscious.
Right. And that speaks to this. Yeah, the blurring of the lines. And it's dangerous to do that. It is, it really is. So the second question is, what attempts do you see in today's culture of trying to marry heaven and hell? And how do you think this dysfunctional marriage has changed culture today? Do you see anything in our culture that's trying to marry the two?
I think some people think it's okay to do anything, whatever you want to do, whether it's right or wrong or good or bad, it's okay.
Feels
Yeah.
good, do it.
Yeah.
I hate the you do you, whatever.
I think if you blur the line, if you're doing away with heaven and hell, you do go with good and bad, you do go with, any, what do we use?
Consequences.
Well, consequences as well as,
Responsibility.
responsibility. You're doing away with responsibility.
And morals.
Of what's going on.
And morals. Prime
Well,
example.
and moral, but it's the responsibility. If you're not responsible for anything, you can't be blamed. And that's one of the things I saw at G and Mississippi. They were able to get rid of the responsibility, nothing got done.
Well, legalization of abortion. I mean, we're saying it's okay to kill a baby. That's the first thing that comes to mind, but there's a whole bunch of those things that we have now legalized that's okay to do, which is not really morally okay to do.
In the same context of that, executing people. In one case, you're executing an unborn person for something it did not do. In another case, you may be executing somebody else for something they did do, or for something you thought they did, right? When in fact, maybe they didn't do it. So I think that capital punishment, in my opinion, is a form of that, although I don't like this term of marrying hell, heaven. I think it's a bad analogy.
Well, blame William Blake for that.
Right.
But
And C.S. Lewis for bringing it up.
Oh, it was already there. He didn't have to bring it up.
I was
Blake
reading-
came before Lewis.
I was reading a book on creation, and they were talking about man able to create parts of a cell, but they can't put them together because one it takes a whole lot of heat, the other takes a whole lot of cold.
Yeah.
Put it in hell, you can't put them together.
So let me read to you Isaiah 5, verse 20. It speaks to this. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. So what is Isaiah saying here to warn the nation of Israel that they were in rebellion against God? What's he saying? Basically.
Said David was wrong.
They're calling evil good, and they're calling good evil.
And we do that today.
What were they doing when Isaiah was writing? What were the, do you remember what the Israelites were doing for the most part?
Singing a lot of worshiping other
A
gods.
lot of worshiping of other gods, yeah. Idol worship, yeah. A lot of that particularly, yeah. Do you think God's standards have changed since the time of Isaiah?
No.
Yes, neither do I. Now, here's something you'll like. Lewis disagreed with Blake. In his view, all good comes from God. Nothing good comes from hell. And there can be no legitimate marriage of the two. Matthew 5, 29 to 30. I always shudder to bring Jesus into these discussions, but why not, right? Matthew 5, 29 to 22, Sermon on the Mount. Here's what Jesus says. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. On the journey to heaven, which luggage cannot be carried along? And why might we have to leave our right hand and right eye behind? Why might we have to do that? What luggage? That's a great phrase. What's that?
The sin that we've committed.
Okay. How about there's some sin that we tolerate,
Hmm.
that if we leave it unchecked, it can eventually destroy us? As we get further into this book, now remember, we're not reading a theology textbook here. He says that right up front. He says, this is a story. This is, but it's full of meaning. I think what he's getting at here, guys, is it's better to experience the pain of removal, and you're going to encounter this as we go forward. You haven't really encountered it yet. But one of the things you're going to encounter, spoiler alert, is as they approach the solid world, they are going to be encountered. Some of these folks are going to be encountered. Most of the book is about some of these folks who have gotten on the bus. And you saw in chapter 2 what a big struggle that was, but we'll get there. Most of these folks who have gotten on the bus are going to be confronted by people who are already in heaven. And they're going to be invited to come and stay. But they got something they got to let go of. And each person has their own different thing. And so we'll get into that. So spoiler alert. That's a lot of what happens in the rest of the book. So we need to examine our lives for anything that causes us to sin and take every action to remove it. That's what Jesus says. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. So yeah, okay. What does Lewis mean by this statement here? Evil can be undone, but it cannot develop into good. What do you think he means by that?
You can repent.
Ah,
You know, the thing that comes to mind with me
yeah, go ahead.
is Paul.
Okay.
And the evil that Paul did
Yeah.
prior to his confrontation with Jesus really wasn't undone.
No.
In the sense of the people that had been harmed. That had not changed.
No.
And this is, I don't know why that comes to my mind.
Oh, sure.
When, every time I see this, him saying this is what I think of, in that the evil was undone inside of Paul. And that developed into good. If not for Paul, I think you can make a generalized statement that if not for Paul, Christianity would have developed into total Greek philosophy.
Probably would have.
And would have just vaporized. at
Yeah,
some
right.
point
It would have
in
just
time.
kind of, went up. Yeah. Go ahead.
I sort of look at it like lots of times in government and business and everything else, the reason something is done is because whoever's in charge won't fill their pocket. And then once it gets to going, it turns out that that was a pretty good thing, even though it started simply so somebody could make money off of it. It turned out to be a benefit to a lot of different people and a lot of different things, and that's what I look at it like that. Evil getting turned into good.
Romans 12:21, speaking of Paul, says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And of course, our supreme example of that is Christ, who overcame the evil of sin and death on the cross and then the resurrection. We should not let another person's evil provoke us to evil thoughts, evil attitudes, or evil deeds. And that's a big should. It's a big should not. And that's, so how do we overcome? We don't overcome evil with evil. So yeah, okay. A couple more here and then we'll move on to chapter 1. What does Lewis say in the preface will happen if we insist on keeping hell? That's the first part. What will happen?
We won't get out of it.
We won't see heaven. That's his big thing, yeah. And if we accept heaven, what will we not be able to keep?
The things of hell.
He says the smallest and most intimate souvenirs of hell. Yes. Yep. But if we accept heaven, what will we find? Listen to what he says. If we accept heaven, we will find that what he or she abandoned, even the plucking out of their right eye, has not been lost. That the kernel of what they were really seeking, even in their most depraved wishes, will be there beyond expectations. Yep.
The only thing I have to the premises about heaven and hell, in the end time, the Bible says there's gonna be a final judgment, and
Of course.
everybody's gonna be judged.
Of course.
So in that final judgment, the things that you have done that you haven't been forgiven for, you're gonna eventually be forgiven and go into heaven. Whereas what he's saying is that there is no forgiveness, that you either gotta be totally good or you gotta be totally bad.
You gotta finish this book. That's not what he's saying at all. And that's we're just in the preface, but that's not what happens near the end of this book. So we're gonna have to wait on that. Yeah, so that's not at all. And just a point of theology, Christ's work on the cross has already achieved for us the forgiveness of our sins, past, present, and future. So in the reality, there's really nothing left for us to be forgiven for by Christ. His blood has covered us. Hey, Peggy. So, but hold on to that, because don't rush to any conclusions about, some of us have read this. Has anybody read this? Okay.
A long time ago.
Yeah, don't rush to any conclusions about his belief about heaven or hell yet until you finish the book, because he very much believes in judgment. The sun is going to go down in this book, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. So just hang on to that. All right, so that's good. But I appreciate you stating it. I really do. All right, why does Lewis put in his disclaimer at the conclusion of the preface? He says this is a piece of fiction, all right? And in no way is his story to be confused with his works of theology. He states that this work will bring readers on a journey that is quite intentionally a fantasy, but a fantasy with a moral. He does not imagine or speculate what may actually await us. Okay? So this is just a story, and it's written in the style of his favorite writer, and George MacDonald. And he was a writer of children's fantasy, and George was, C.S. Lewis loved George MacDonald. All right, so yeah, so it's good stuff. All right, so let's go to chapter 1.
Before we go,
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Hoyt.
So did Tolkien.
I know. Yeah. Yes, sir.
on page, my eyes are really screwed up. On page 9, IX,
Yeah,
at the very bottom, or not, let's see, maybe that's.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, at the very bottom,
Yeah.
where he says that he wants to give credit to a writer
Yeah,
for having written something that gave him this idea.
yeah,
Two things. Everything that I have been able to come across,
yeah.
can't find an American magazine called Scientification. All of and there are people who research this topic, some of them for almost doctoral thesis.
Sure.
None of them have been able to find an American publication called Scientification. They believe that he got confused with an English publication called Amazing Stories.
Hmm.
And in that publication, one of the publications, a guy, I think the guy's name is Charles Hall,
Mhm.
wrote a story, and the name of the story was The Man Who Lived Backwards.
Yeah.
I've got the book somewhere at home. I'm
Sure.
gonna try to find it, and maybe bring it next time around. But it's just a little side kind of thing.
Yeah,
If you were to Google, for example, who was he referring to
Yeah,
here? It
yeah.
will come up
Yeah.
with Charles Hall, the man who lived backwards,
very well may have been.
and an amazing story.
Yeah, very well may have been. Yeah.
Just to be picky, I did not read it that he was calling the magazine science fiction.
Yeah,
I
he's
love
not.
that word.
He's
It
talking
is
about the
the-
genre,
Yeah, the genre.
and it very well may have been Amazing Stories. Yeah, it very well may have been. Yeah, that's good.
Could have
That's
been.
good. But I'm glad you brought it up. That's good. That's good. All right, let's go to chapter 1.
I didn't miss much, huh?
Well, yeah, you missed a pretty good
A
bit.
lot. Sounds like it.
As the story begins, Lewis is he's our narrator, by the way, if you didn't know that. He's the guy on the bus, okay? Finds himself waiting in a long line for a magical bus ride in a dismally uncomforting gray town. His companions in line are argumentative, combative, and generally disagreeable of differing economic and educational backgrounds. And as the story progresses, we learn that these characters are damned souls on vacation. And this is where I'm gonna have to, disagree with the folks who put this study guide together. They're damned souls on vacation. And this guy says the gray town is purgatory. Well, no, he's right. It's either purgatory for some, but it's also the outskirts of hell for others. It just depends right now, okay? So it just depends.
Does it sort of describe Sheol?
Yeah, Sheol, right, Hades. But they're on vacation, and they're waiting on the bus. And I love this quote: "Why on earth they insist on coming, I can't imagine. They won't like it at all when we get there, and they'd really be much more comfortable at home." All right. So starting here, let's look at the mood, the atmosphere, and the images. Just talk to me about the mood and the atmosphere or images and depictions of the gray town.
When he first starts describing it, he doesn't see anybody. It's just dreary and really kind of a place that you wouldn't want to be. And the only
Depressing.
reason he gets in line is because there's somebody else there.
Inner city.
Yeah, it's inner city, right. Yeah, what's the mood there?
Depressing.
Yeah, what kind of images does it give you?
Dingy lodging houses, boardings from which posters hung in rags, windowless warehouses,
Yeah,
station without trains.
basically Doraville.
Without a lot of the people, there's hardly, he doesn't come across anybody else until he sees the line.
Right.
And that's the only reason he gets into the line,
Yeah, that's true.
near somebody.
Do you find Lewis's depiction of hell or purgatory, depending on how you look at it, do you find Lewis's depiction of hell or purgatory at this point accurate?
I don't know.
I mean,
Me too.
accurate.
I was gonna
I haven't
say.
been there.
I
Accurate.
don't want to go.
Accurate. Yeah, keep that in mind. Accurate. All right. Well, yeah, the quote that Carol, these dingy lodging houses, small tobacconists, hoardings from which posters hung in rags, windowless warehouses, goods stations without trains, and worst of all for Lewis, uninteresting bookshops. He interjects a lot of himself into this. So it's always raining. It's evening, always raining, and it never advances to night. Yeah.
Did anybody ever watch the Amazon Prime series, Man in Tall Castle? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, I watched it. Yeah.
You remember the episode with the bookseller
Mm-hmm.
and the guy comes in, you know?
Remember.
And I stopped watching that somewhere around episode 5. It's
Right.
just too dark.
It is.
Too everything
It
for
is.
me. But that and I can't remember the episode of Twilight Zone come to mind. There was an episode of the Twilight Zone,
Uh-huh.
and Rod Sterling may have based it on this.
You may have.
It was and of course, the Twilight Zone was black and white,
Right.
no color.
Very
And-
good.
But it was
Always.
something very, very similar to this.
Yeah.
And what it does, it just gives me sort of chills.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ed.
The first part was talking about this town. I didn't see purgatory in it as much as I did as they were on the bus ride, and it's talking about these people basically being in their own planets, and they still had all this fussing and fighting that's going on.
Yeah.
I saw that more purgatory
Okay.
than this town.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good observation. The gray town is revealed within the context of the story to be the outer limits of hell or purgatory for those who will eventually reach heaven. The reader is to consider this an imaginative representation of hell rather than an accurate biblical representation of the real hell. Just keep that in mind. Using the following Bible passages, we're going to look at the nature of hell, and we're going to see what it says. Now, I'm going to give them to you. Revelation 14, 10 to 11. The Bible speaks of a place, an eternal kind of smoky place where you can receive no rest, where there's no rest. 2 Thessalonians 1:9 speaks of eternal separate, you're separate from the presence and the glory of the Lord. To me, that's the worst part of hell, just even thinking about it. Revelation 21:8 speaks of a fiery lake of burning sulfur. Matthew 25:41 in the parable of the sheep and goats speaks of an eternal fire, Gehenna, that punishes the wicked, the devil and his demons. Mark 9:44 to 49, Jesus speaks of a place where worms do not die and the fire is not quenched. Revelation 20 verse 10 speaks of a lake of fire and brimstone. Matthew 13:41 to 42 uses the image of the furnace of fire with weeping and gnashing of teeth. Matthew 3 speaks of a place of verse 12 speaks of a place of unquenchable fire. Daniel 12 verse 2 speaks of a place of shame and everlasting contempt. I would put that one together with this being separate from the presence of the glory of God. That just kind of gets me. And then Luke 16, a place of torment and fire. Scripture doesn't tell us the geological location of hell, but what we do know that that according to Orthodox Christianity, there will be, and I'm not saying Eastern Orthodox, I'm just saying Orthodox creedal Christianity, that there will be a place of separation. And the most important part of all is that we should probably try not to go there.
Yeah.
If we can help it. All right. So the souls. Let's talk about these souls that Lewis encounters while waiting for and getting on the bus. They seem to represent various forms of sin in what used to be called, the capital sins, or what is commonly referred to as the 7 deadly sins. The personalities that he encounters in line and on the bus. We think about the 7 deadly sins, and let's line them up with some of the folks he encounters. Envy.
Pride.
Envy is the desire to have an item, or maybe the feeling that someone else possesses it. Did you notice that all of them seem to be envious of the bus driver? Because he radiates some sort of joy and happiness that they don't have. Okay. Secondly, gluttony. There is an excessive, the big beefy man who throws his weight around would likely represent gluttony. Greed, the man who cheats a woman for a better spot in the bus line. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Cheats her out of it. Lust, the androgynous couple who decide not to get on the bus and instead giggle off together arm in arm. Represent lust. Maybe vanity or pride, the very short man who feels like the others in line are not up to his standards, right? Sloth, which is a terrible translation. Akadia is the Greek word here. I love what Dr. Craddock translated. I don't care. Sloth. He said that sloth sounded like you'd stayed in the bathwater too long. Sloth. But he would use the tousle-haired poet believes that he is there by someone else's mistake and not of his own doing. And then wrath or anger, at some point, all of these folks seem to represent anger, including the big man striking the small man. Also, the quarrelsome couple is angry at each other and seem to have a competition of unselfishness, which is the root of pride. So all of these characters, they're not just, they represent possibly these 7 deadly sins, capital ones, okay? Let's see what we got here. So as people continue to leave the bus line, did you notice that? People are leaving, just keep leaving. And he's excited because
This is getting closer.
I'm going to get on the bus. As people continue to leave the bus line, what principle is Lewis trying to establish regarding a town in which any real life is absent, yet there is little desire to move beyond it? Even though they're in hell, no one wants to stand in line for heaven. And those that do can't figure out why they're even going up there, or they're going for the wrong reason. And that's based off the conversation that we're hearing. In the same way, we see people struggle with giving their life to Christ, and I see folks in church who have made that decision, who have been baptized, but don't take that next step of discipleship, that deeper step of discipleship. But we see people struggle with actually making the decision to be a Christian, even when the alternative is a dire, dismal, and depressing future. Okay, so that's part of what's going on there. Now, the souls complain about the bus driver. I love it. Why can't he behave naturally? Naturally. Did you hear that? Let me read you something that Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. He says, the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. So, why do unbelievers have difficulty relating to or understanding a believer's joy? I would ask that question differently. Why do unbelievers and some believers have difficulty relating to understanding a believer's pure joy? Because believe it or not, there are some folks in church who kind of look at some disciples and go, what's wrong with you? Why are you so joyful in your service and everything? And so, but keep it to the unbelievers. Why do they have such difficulty understanding a believer's joy?
They haven't experienced Christ.
What?
They
Haven't
haven't
experienced
experienced Christ.
And
I mean, I think it takes a personal relationship with him to see that joy and to be joyful. And even though there's nothing to be joyful about, a person who grieves the death of a family member, and we all do it, if they come in and are not downtrodden and horribly sad, we think, what's wrong with them? Aren't they sad that whoever that was is now gone? But the believer is grateful that if that person was a Christian, he's no longer suffering. He or she is now in the arms of Jesus. What more can you ask for than that?
That's good. Whichever one, whichever age. Go ahead.
I think that the unbeliever sees a spectrum of believers out
Sure.
there. And on one end of the spectrum, they see the believers who are just ecstatic. And they see those people as insincere.
Right.
That it's sort of a form of arrogance.
Right.
And so they have a problem with that. On the other end of the spectrum of believers out there, they see the believers who don't live life.
Right.
And they see them as hypocritical.
Right.
So you've got this end of the spectrum, this end of the spectrum, then somewhere in the middle is where the unbeliever is trying to find a place.
Right. I like that. That's good. Anthony, you wanted to share something as well.
I was gonna say that, to me, I think a lot of times the unbelievers, believe that they're so smart, there's no way that there could have been anybody raised from the dead, and it's all a bunch of folly, and, you know, that sort of makes fun of it until,
Right.
till the point that it actually hits them.
Right. Sort of like the old,
It's like a ton of bricks.
sort of like the old adage, there's no atheists in the trench.
Right. Now let's see.
Plane crashes, there's no atheist in plane crashes.
Right. Right. So let's encounter the tassel-haired poet. Cannot imagine why the other souls would insist on coming on the bus, and concludes that they would be much more comfortable at home. So what parallel is there to our comfort and how we deal with sin? What parallel is there to our comfort and how we deal with sin? And if you would, somebody pick up these scriptures that are up here, read through those, and discuss that question whilst I go over here. Again, what parallel is there to our comfort and how we deal with sin? These sinners would be much more comfortable at home.
I think the first scripture was Revelation 4. I don't remember which
No,
verse
he
it's.
talking
No,
about-
1 John
It's up
1:8.
there, 1 John.
Oh, which is if we
Sorry.
confess our, I know 1:6 is if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins.
I'm sorry.
The 1 John 1:8, 1:6 is if we confess our, isn't that right? And so,
John 1:9.
oh, okay, well, let me look it up.
Basically, 1 John 1:8 is, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us.
And Romans 12:9 is let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good.
To me, it's very
Yeah.
simple. If you don't deal with your sin, it's much more comfortable than dealing with your sin.
Yep.
So if you say, for example, I really didn't mean to do that. So, you know, it's not my fault that that person has been in the situation they're in. I didn't mean to do that. So that's how I think that if you deal with sin, you're gonna be uncomfortable. You're gonna be uncomfortable with the process. Once the process is complete, then it's a different thing. But in dealing with it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to go to somebody and say,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I was wrong, and I offended you, and I really won't cry about it. That's uncomfortable. But to say to somebody else, she shouldn't have really got her feelings hurt over that, you know, that's not as uncomfortable.
Good.
So how many of us went on the freedom rides to go against
I
Jim
didn't
Crow?
go.
I didn't either,
And,
but that's being
I didn't know
comfortable
anything
in
about
our
it.
sin.
yeah.
I had two
Well-
kids and made less every month than I was supposed to pay, that didn't help.
Right.
Well, I didn't realize at the time it was as sinful as it was, you know, and
Yeah, I
and it
didn't know.
is. Just
Yeah,
an
'cause-
unawareness.
I was overprotected from that too.
I think the unawareness, because we were out of the country, I didn't know what was
Yeah.
going on, so.
Well, we knew here pretty much, because most of it was going on,
Sure.
next door,
Mhm.
Alabama,
Mhm.
Mississippi. And at that time, and probably even true today, but at that time, a ton of people from Mississippi and Alabama were coming to Atlanta because Atlanta was the only place where there was real work. GM was hiring people and people were moving from all over Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, coming to work for GM here in Atlanta. And we had those people living next door to us. Most of them were racist. Yeah, it really truly was. And I had some degree of it myself. And they would tell stories about the Freedom Riders that they got from back home that were just gross about what they were doing. That this one woman, I forget her name, the white woman from, I think, Michigan, who had children who came down here because of her conscience and took part in that. She ended up being killed by police or
KKK.
something. And so they told the story that in the hospital, when they did an autopsy, that it was evident that she had been sleeping with all of these black men. And so that was the story they were telling around in my neighborhood of what was about that woman. I didn't know anything. Later on, I found out it was a very, very different situation. You know, that she really was a good person. But I think it would, I didn't know anybody in my circle of people, not just friends, but just circle of people. I did not know the first person who stood up for freedom.
I remember the things happening and everything, and to me, I didn't know there was anything wrong with segregation. The way that we were raised, so, hey, they live their way, we live our way. You never really thought about that we were getting more than they were getting. I can remember visiting some cousins in Alabama, and one of the places they took us was the white school and the black school. The white school had windows knocked out of it, the black school, they were perfect. And they were saying, hey, this is where the blacks go, it's better than where we go. And things of that nature. So it was one of those situations where it may have been sin, but you didn't really know it was sin because you wasn't taught that it was wrong.
One last question, and we'll move to chapter 2. What do you think of Lewis's idea that there will be fish and chips, and movies and advertising in hell? I hope there's, chips and cheese dip, to be perfectly honest, but what do you think about that?
He's an Englishman, isn't he?
Oh, very much.
So that's where the fish and chips comes, but he must not like it if he thinks it's gonna be in hell instead of in heaven.
That's
Good
what,
point.
that's a good point.
That is a good point.
Hell is England. There you go, yeah, right. Go ahead.
Okay, my thought, oh,
Go ahead. you
Either
go ahead.
one. You
my
go.
thought is that that's just one way to keep your mind off of God.
That's it.
That's a good
Deter
point.
us.
You know,
Yeah.
we have learned from other
good.
readings of C.S. Lewis that he was very, while he's a good guy and all that kind of stuff, he was also, I can't think of the term, but very nationalistic.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
He believed that the United Kingdom was the epitome of mankind here on earth, and that everybody else, including those Moorish Americans, were further down the rung, and
Arrogant.
arrogant, yeah. And
That's
he,
arrogance.
I just don't think, I think it was just so much of him that he couldn't write anything else but if he was gonna write about anything, it would reflect his British.
Yes, of course. Yeah, of course. All right, chapter 2. The bus. We don't know where we're going, but presumably better destination. We learn a bit more about the Greytown as well as the passengers on the bus. It's in this setting that we learn not all of the passengers are going to heaven for the right reasons, but rather to get something for themselves. Here's the quote. The trouble is they have no needs. You get everything you want in Shadowlands. Not very good quality, of course, by just imagining it, right? You get whatever you want. So back to the tassel-haired poet. What was a young man's sin?
Greed, I guess.
Oh, that's nice.
Or acceptance for his ideas.
Yeah. He feels very unappreciated by his parents, and he was better than any of the 5 schools he attended.
That's
And his
different.
girlfriend was a mean person when she didn't want to apparently give him more money that he didn't earn.
That's right. And he has a distaste for capitalism because he believed it makes it impossible for a new genius like himself to be recognized, right? So what does he do? He becomes a communist and then a conscientious objector once Russia helps Britain in the war against Germany. Eventually he moves to America, where he meets a girl who treats him poorly. His self-pity is so strong, he finally throws himself under a train, not desiring to live in a world that is against him. That's sad.
It is sad.
His sin is most likely vanity, having an excessive desire for attention and respect from others, which leaves him feeling like the victim that does not receive it. He seeks money, acceptance, and praise, but never gives in return. And even in the afterlife, he's a victim. He arrives in the Greytown where he obviously believes he doesn't belong. So he starts searching for acceptance there, but he's unable to find it. Now he's traveling to heaven for some self-centered reasons, believing he might at last be recognized there for his talent and his temperament. It's a sad story. It really is.
Especially since it's happening so much.
Yes, yes. John 5:5-9 speaks of Jesus and the invalid who had been invalid for 38 years. Why do you think Jesus asks the invalid if he really wanted to be healed?
Because some people like the attention they get when they're sick.
This is true.
Also, there's a fear when you've been in a situation for so long, there's a fear of coming out. People who have been in abusive situations,
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah.
many times will not leave because of fear of leaving. The unknown,
The
fear of the unknown is
Mhm.
worse than the fear of the known.
Yeah.
Yeah, better the devil you know.
Better the devil you know. Yeah, it's good. Okay. Let's move to the intelligent ghost. By the way, that's one thing we haven't talked about. It's the shade of these people. What do they look like to the young men? They're ghost-like, right? They're ghosts, they're shadows, right? We have the intelligent ghost. What more do we learn about the Greytown from the intelligent ghost? What does he say? He says it's a somber, desolate place, but what else does he say? Its quarreling inhabitants are constantly spreading throughout the town so as to be as far away from each other as possible. They cannot find any good with each other that would draw them together. As a result, there's no community since there is no need to rely on one another. They can think structures and homes and other things into existence, but it still does not meet their needs. So they go off somewhere else, and the town continues to spread. And the intelligent ghost claims that the longer people have been there, held, the less likely they are to ever reach the bus. That's because their vanity or their pride drives them further and further away from each other until they are infinitely far away from the bus stop. He even mentions well-known historical figures like Napoleon, Julius Caesar, and Genghis Khan who lived there. But it's not likely that you will see them since they are light years away by this time, right? So, I'm trying to wrap us up here. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the need for community in your life? Just a couple of you, just how would you rate the need for community in your life?
10.
10.
And that's what was going through my mind as well.
Mhm.
Anybody dare go lower than that?
I hate to say 5.
Shame on you.
No, I totally agree.
But
Yeah.
you've got your community.
I do have a community.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Neighbors, church.
Wife.
But he would be, I, 5 is accurate for him.
Okay.
I really think so. I mean,
Okay.
yes, he chooses to live and be with us and all that, but if
Yeah.
for some reason he would disappear to an island by himself, he would be
Be
perfectly
content.
fine.
They
We
would,
would too.
they could,
So would we.
they could put me on a ship into space, and I'd be happy as heck to keep seeing new things.
New things, yeah.
Until the
Yes.
oxygen ran out. So, okay, so 10, I would be, okay. I probably, 8 or 9. But I can't stay alone for too long.
I can't
don't like
either.
to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I need community. I need it to be there, but I also want my
Sure.
300 acres
Understood.
with the nearest neighbor.
These
a
folks in
mile
hell
each
would
way.
agree with you.
But I need to know that they are there.
I understand. And these folks are not there for each other.
The part that says, have you seen this need fade due to technology, the busy pace of
Yeah.
life? or something? I totally agree with that, because so many times you see couples sitting at a table having dinner
Yes.
together and both of them are on their phone.
Whole families.
Or whole families that do that.
Well, they're
And
probably
it-
talking to each other.
That's true.
They,
That's
yeah,
true. I've
they-
been
They
to
might
a-
be, but still, they're communicating, but they're not,
Not verbally.
they're not physically communicating, they're technologically,
Nearness
And that
of
happens,
a,
I think that,
nearness of another warm body does not make a community.
no, this is
Mm.
true, yeah.
And we have to understand that with technology, community is changing.
Oh,
And,
absolutely, yeah.
and giving someone, just speaking of church, our Zoom attendance has gone up. And she and I talk about it a lot. And I wish so-and-so would come back to, well, they're not, but they're on Zoom and they're still part of this community and they're still joining in with us. And if it wasn't for the technology, the argument is they would come. I don't know. I'm grateful that the technology allows us to still be together.
Yeah.
And it's a reality, folks, and it's not going away, and it is here to stay. But yeah, I think it's good.
I wonder,
Part of that technology, I guess, with my 5, I respond if somebody calls me. But if you send me a text or an email, I might not see it for
I know,
several
that's one of the
days.
most frustrating things. Yeah.
And people don't understand why you don't respond immediately.
No, I really don't understand.
Read that.
I'm gonna put people on it, I'll put James on it.
I wonder if, speaking of the Zoom,
Yeah,
if there was a situation where the threat of our physical church going away, if we didn't have the community here in
Right.
church,
Right.
if it might not bring up the physical attendance, you know, because we think it's going to be here, so, you know, there's not, some people don't make that effort to be here, and it does take some effort, and you have to invest. You have to invest in what you believe in, so, yes.
Last one, and then we're done, because it's 12:02. The fat, clean-shaven man believed the intelligent ghost of materialism would take the souls of the Greytown in the wrong direction. What did the fat, clean-shaven man believe would be their best option? To open up their creative functions. What's their best option? He believes that the Greytown is already a great spiritual city. He gets really upset because they're talking about judgment. They're talking about the old theology of hell and judgment. And he gets upset. Outdated superstitions. And what the inhabitants of the town really need is to be spiritually unencumbered by any materialism and matter. Right? They have finally escaped their bodily prisons, and they're ready to realize their full creative potential. Although not immediately, it would happen over time. We sing hymns like that. I'll Fly Away is one of them.
That's my here's
Yeah.
favorite
Leave
song.
the bodily prison. Gnosticism is alive and well. The body bad, the spirit good. And, you know, it creeps in. And this fat, clean-shaven man would agree with that. So, one more, I'm just going to give you this one and then we're done. The light of heaven reveals about the passengers how hideous they are. They were all fixed faces, this is a quote, full not of possibilities but impossibilities, some gaunt, some bloated, some glaring with idiotic ferocity, some drowned by recovery and dreams, but all, in one way or another, distorted and faded, fading away. Yeah. So, yeah. All right. Chapters 3 and 4 next week. Thank y'all for being here.
Oh, thank you.
And remember, this is just a story,
No, fiction.
which it's more than a story, but
I was worried when I first read these three.
why?
I didn't know how you were going to present,
Mhm.
and I think you've done a good job of presenting it.
Thank you.
Biblical verses along with
Sure.
it.
Yeah, gotta have some Bible. Yeah, it's just a story.
Yeah,
Keep telling yourself that.
But some good things
But
to
it
talk
does
Narnia,
have
about.
the Chronicles of Narnia are just stories.
These are some good things to talk about.
yeah, there's some
Yeah,
moral.
yeah. There
Gonna be
was-
some good stuff coming up. When they encounter the people in heaven,
Corinthians.
it's gonna get really real,
Hmm.
really real. All right, go and be well fed.
So 3 and 4, you say?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I learned something about